Step away from the car now. I know you didn't buy this car. The words cut through the Saturday afternoon air like a blade. Officer Derek Mitchell's hand rested on his gun holster as he looked at the woman standing next to a pristine 1967 Mustang. Kesha Washington, dressed in jeans and a plain blazer, slowly raised her hands. Shoppers stopped around her. Phones popped up. A circle formed. "Put your hands on the hood," Mitchell barked, his voice carrying across the upscale shopping district parking lot. "This vehicle matches a reported stolen." Kesha's designer purse slid off her shoulder as she complied. Through the car window, a leather briefcase lay on the passenger seat, its official seal just visible beneath the scattered papers. The crowd was growing, the cameras rolling. Have you ever been judged by the color of your skin rather than the content of your character, even when you wielded more power than those judging you? 10 minutes until courtroom security realized Judge Washington was away on an emergency court conference. Officer Mitchell circled the Mustang like a predator studying its prey. His 12 years on the force had taught him to notice inconsistencies. A black woman in casual clothes driving a car worth more than most people's annual salary. The math didn't add up in his head. "That car is worth more than you make in 5 years, he said, his voice loud enough for the growing crowd to hear. So let's start with the truth. 20 feet away, college student Amara Johnson held her phone steady, broadcasting live to her TikTok followers. The viewer count grew. 847, 1,203, 2,456. The comments filled the screen faster than she could read them. "Officer, I can explain," Kesha began, her voice calm despite the humiliation burning in her chest. "No, ma'am." Mitchell's hand went to his radio. "You explain to the detectives. Now, I need to see the registration, the insurance, and the proof of purchase for this vehicle." The crowd pressed closer. Some were filming openly, others were pretending to shop, their eyes glued to the unfolding drama. Kesha noticed an older black woman pushing her way through the gathering crowd, recognition flickering across her weathered face. "That's not the woman," she began. "Step back, ma'am," Mitchell warned, his eyes never leaving Kesha. "This is a police matter." Kesha's phone vibrated against her hip. The Chief Justice was calling. She couldn't answer. Not with her hands still pressed to the warm metal of her father's restored car. The same car she'd driven to countless family barbecues. The one that held his memory in every immaculate detail. "I need you to empty your pockets," Mitchell continued. His backup should be arriving soon. Saturdays in this neighborhood usually meant simple calls for petty theft, but this felt like more. It felt like a career-making arrest. "Officer Mitchell." Kesha read his badge with deliberate precision. Badge number 4,847. "I need you to understand." "What I understand," he interrupted, "is that you're stalling. People who own cars like this don't act nervous around the police." The livestream's viewership had reached 8,932. Amara's phone battery was at 34%, but she couldn't stop filming. This was the kind of content that changed everything. Real stories that exposed the truth about racial profiling in America. Through the window of the Mustang, Kesha's leather briefcase caught the daylight. A first-class boarding pass from her recent conference in Washington, D.C., tucked into her side pocket. Next to it, barely visible, was an expired VIP courthouse parking permit for her previous car. Her phone vibrated again. An emergency conference. An important civil rights case. Her voice was needed. "Ma'am, let me ask you one more time," Mitchell said, his patience theatrical for the cameras. "How did you get this car?" "It belonged to my father," Kesha replied. "Judge Robert Washington." Mitchell's expression didn't change. Names meant nothing without proof, and proof was exactly what he intended to demand. "Anyone can claim anything. I need documentation." The crowd murmured. Someone whispered, "Judge Washington." And heads turned. The older woman tried to step forward again, but other bystanders held her back, not wanting to escalate the situation. "Officer," the mall security guard approached, his radio crackling. "Everything under control?" "Just processing a possible motor vehicle theft," Mitchell replied, calling for backup to assist with the search. "Search?" The words struck the crowd like an electric shock. Phones emerged from purses and pockets. The circle widened but narrowed, as if everyone knew they were witnessing something significant. Kesha's briefcase was in the back seat, the state Supreme Court seal facing away from the windows. Inside were documents that would end this humiliation instantly, but trying to get them now would only heighten Mitchell's suspicions. Her phone vibrated for the third time. She closed her eyes for a moment, calculating 10 minutes before her absence became a crisis. 10 minutes before a crucial vote on police accountability measures took place without her vote. The irony was not lost on her. "Backup is on the way," Mitchell announced over his radio, requesting a supervisor for a potential vehicle seizure. Amara's live feed reached 12,847 viewers. Comments exploded on her screen. "This is disgusting. Why isn't anyone helping her? Where is this happening? Has someone called the news?" An older woman finally broke away from the crowd. "Officer, this woman. Ma'am, this is your final warning. Move aside or be arrested for interfering with police business." Kesha watched the woman back away, defeat in her eyes. Anyone who might recognize her, court staff, fellow attorneys, law clerks, was either in an emergency meeting or avoiding weekend shopping. She was alone, surrounded by strangers whose phones captured every humiliating second. Mitchell turned his radio back on. "Unit 407 requests additional backup to search vehicle. Suspect is uncooperative and crowd is becoming hostile." Uncooperative. Hostile. Those words would appear in his report, shaping the narrative before the truth had a chance to emerge. Kesha understood the power of language, how it could turn a victim into a perpetrator with careful choice of words. A few minutes left. Her briefcase lay inches away, holding everything she needed to end this nightmare. But to reach out would mean sudden movement, escalation, risking the very confrontation her legal training had always taught her to avoid. So she waited, hands on the hood, cameras rolling, power hidden in plain sight. Minutes before court security realized Judge Washington was missing, sirens blared through the Saturday shopping hum. 2 patrol cars turned the corner, their blue lights casting strobe shadows over the crowd. Sergeant Reynolds stepped out of the lead car, his 23 years of experience evident in his measured approach. "What do we have, Mitchell?" Reynolds surveyed the scene. An immaculate Mustang, a smartly dressed woman with her hands on the hood, a crowd of witnesses with phones. "Possible vehicle theft," Mitchell replied, puffing out his chest. "Suspect claims the car belonged to her father, but cannot provide adequate..." Reynolds studied Kesha more closely. Something was wrong with Mitchell's assessment, but protocol required an officer on the scene to back him up. "Ma'am, we're going to ask you to step away from the vehicle while we conduct our investigation." Amara's live feed exploded to 23,407 viewers. Her phone's battery was down to 28%, but she couldn't stop filming. The comment section was moving too fast to read, but she caught snippets. Hashtag racial profiling, hashtag Black Lives Matter, hashtag justice for Judge Washington. Wait, Judge Washington. Officer Janet Torres stepped out of a second patrol car. Her 5 years on the force made her wary of high-profile situations. She immediately began crowd control, setting up a perimeter and documenting the scene with her body camera. "Sir, we need to maintain order," Torres told Reynolds. "This crowd is getting agitated, and we've got media coming in." Sure enough, a local news van pulled into the parking lot, its satellite dish extended. Reporter Jennifer Martinez walked out, her cameraman following, drawn by the social media buzz already trending on multiple platforms. In the crowd, an older woman, Mrs. Dorothy Hayes, pulled out her phone. Her arthritic fingers moved slowly across the screen, searching the courthouse directory. She knew that face, those calm, intelligent eyes. 40 years in the legal system had taught her to recognize authority, even when she was dressed casually. "Officers," Kesha said, her voice carrying the authority she used daily in courtrooms. "I understand your concerns, but I need to make a phone call. This creates a serious misunderstanding." "No phone calls until we complete our investigation," Mitchell snapped. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back," the crowd murmured. Someone shouted, "She's not resisting." Another voice cried, "This is stalking." The purple-haired teenager was live streaming from another angle, adding to the digital documentation of the incident. Reynolds raised his hand for silence. His radio crackled with updates from the control room. Domestic disturbance on 5th Street. Possible robbery at an electronics store. Saturday afternoons were tense, and this situation was consuming too many resources. "Look," Reynolds said, his tone more reasonable than Mitchell's, "if you can provide registration and insurance, we can get this sorted out quickly." Kesha's phone buzzed again. The Chief Justice was calling for the 4th time. 5 minutes left. "The documents are in my briefcase," she said carefully. "In the back seat." Mitchell moved toward the car. "I'll retrieve them for evidence." "There are confidential legal documents in that briefcase," Kesha said sharply. "You can't, ma'am. If you have nothing to hide, you don't have to object to a search." The legal implications hit Kesha like a physical blow. Attorney-client privilege, sealed case files, confidentiality agreements. Her briefcase contained documents that could jeopardize ongoing cases, violate ethical standards, and potentially overturn pending litigation. "Officer, I assert my Fourth Amendment rights. You may not search my vehicle or personal belongings without a warrant or probable cause." Mitchell's smile was cold. Probable cause? What about suspicion of auto theft? The mall's chief of security, Carlos Rodriguez, approached the scene. His decades of retail security experience told him this situation was beyond his jurisdiction. "Officers, the mall is concerned about disruption to business. How long will this take?" "As long as it takes," Mitchell snapped. "We're conducting a criminal investigation," Torres whispered to Reynolds. "Sergeant, live streams are going viral. We have over 40,000 people watching this online." Reynolds felt the weight of attention. Modern policing meant that every action was met with immediate public condemnation. One misstep could ruin a career, spark protests, or trigger federal investigations. In the crowd, Ms. Hayes finally found what she was looking for. Her face lit up when she recognized a photo from the court's website. The Honorable Judge Kesha Washington, Superior Court. She pushed forward again, but the crowd had grown to more than 200. "Officer, this woman is Judge Kesha Washington of the Superior Court," Mrs. Hayes called out, her voice carrying decades of judicial authority. Mitchell froze, the handcuffs halfway around Kesha's wrists. "Ma'am, please step back." "I've been a judge for 40 years, Mrs. Hayes continued. "I know Judge Washington." Her father was Judge Robert Washington. He'd driven this car for 20 years. Reynolds looked at Mrs. Hayes and Kesha, doubt creeping into his expression. Torres activated her radio, requesting a supervisor and additional backup for crowd control. Amara's phone showed 45,678 viewers. Comments poured in from across the country as the hashtag Judge Washington began to trend. Local news stations picked up the broadcast, exponentially increasing their reach. This is Jennifer Martinez, Channel 7 News, reporting live from the Northbrook Mall, where a traffic stop generated considerable interest and raised questions about racial profiling. The situation was spiraling out of Mitchell's control, but his pride would not allow him to back down. 3 years before retirement, with a record that included 18 excessive force complaints and 2 federal lawsuits quietly settled by the city. This arrest could restore his reputation or destroy it. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for failure to provide proper identification of a motor vehicle and obstruction of justice," Mitchell announced, pulling out handcuffs. "Obstruction?" Reynolds asked. "Tom, maybe we should—" She was evasive from the start. Mitchell interrupted. "Turn around." The crowd erupted. Cell phones captured every angle as Kesha slowly turned, her dignity intact despite the humiliation. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. "Sometimes the law fails us, girl, but we never fail the law." Mitchell's radio crackled. "All units be advised. Courthouse security reports Judge Kesha Washington is absent for an emergency hearing. All patrol units to be on alert for possible emergencies or kidnappings." Mitchell's complexion went pale. Reynolds grabbed his radio. "Dispatch 23. Can you provide a description of the missing judge?" African-American female, age 45, approximately 5 feet 6 inches tall, last seen wearing jeans and a dark blazer, driving a blue 1967 Ford Mustang, license plate JRW1967. Reynolds glanced at the car. JRW, 1967, Judge Robert Washington, 1967. 3 minutes left on time. The details clicked. The confident demeanor, the legal knowledge, the careful choice of words. Reynolds had testified in Judge Washington's courtroom dozens of times over the past 5 years. Without the robes and the raised pulpit, he didn't recognize her. "Tom," Reynolds said quietly, "I think we need to—" "I don't care who she says she is," Mitchell growled, but his voice cracked. "Due process requires—" Kesha's phone rang again. This time she could see the caller ID through her pocket. Chief Justice Margaret Thompson. An emergency conference. A landmark case. Her vote was needed to break the 4-by-4 ratio on new police accountability measures. The irony was perfect. "Officers," she said, her voice carrying the quiet authority with which she had commanded courtrooms for 15 years. "I'm going to pull out my badge. You can watch my hands. You can follow protocol, but it ends here." Mitchell picked up the handcuffs again. "Ma'am, don't reach for anything." "Let her," Reynolds said firmly. "Stand back, Tom." The crowd held its breath. 53,000 people watched Amara's live feed. The news camera was rolling. Mrs. Hayes smiled with satisfaction. The minutes were ticking away. Kesha slowly reached for her briefcase, her movements deliberate and visible. Her fingers found the leather briefcase, pulled it out, and opened it. The moment of truth had arrived. The leather briefcase opened with a soft click that seemed to echo throughout the silent parking lot. Inside, among the creamy white legal papers, was a judicial identification badge bearing the seal of the California Superior Court. Judge Kesha Washington, Superior Court, Criminal Division. The silence stretched like a breath. 53,000 viewers watched via Amara's live feed as Officer Mitchell's face transformed from confident authority to dawning terror. The judge's badge caught the sunlight, its official seal unmistakable to anyone who had spent time in courtrooms. "Officer Mitchell," Kesha said, her voice carrying the quiet strength she had earned in legal circles for 15 years. "Badge number 4847. I am Judge Kesha Washington of the Superior Court Criminal Division." The crowd erupted, not in anger, but in shocked recognition. Old Mrs. Hayes folded her arms, satisfaction written all over her weathered face. Amara's phone nearly slipped from her shaking fingers as the comments flooded her screen faster than the eye could follow. "Oh my God, she's a judge. This cop is finished. This is crazy." Reynolds stepped forward. His 23 years of experience told him that this was a career-defining moment for all the wrong reasons. "Your Honor, we had no idea." "Of course you had no idea," Kesha said, closing her briefcase with deliberate precision. "Because you saw a black woman with an expensive car, and you made assumptions based on prejudice, not evidence." Mitchell stood frozen, the handcuffs still hanging from his right hand. The mathematical precision that had driven his actions, black woman plus expensive car equals theft, was crumbling under the weight of reality. This wasn't just any judge. This was Judge Washington, the one in whose courtroom he'd appeared 17 times in his career. The one who questioned his tactics, his reporting, his credibility. "This car," Kesha continued, her voice rising, "belonged to my father, Judge Robert Washington, who served this county for 32 years. In the same courthouse where I now preside, the same courthouse where your department sends officers to testify under oath." She reached into her briefcase again, pulling out a second document. "This is the vehicle registration, clearly showing a transfer from Robert Washington's estate to Kesha Washington, dated 18 months ago. That's what you would see if you approach this situation with professionalism, not prejudice." Reporter Jennifer Martinez moved closer with her camera, realizing the scale of the unfolding story. "Your Honor, can you comment on this encounter?" "I can comment on the systematic failure of training that leads to racial profiling," Kesha responded, her eyes never leaving Mitchell. "I can comment on the public humiliation of a sitting judge based solely on the color of my skin." Viewers for the live stream surpassed 60,000. News outlets across the state began picking up the broadcast. Judge Washington became a national trend within minutes, joining the hashtags racial profiling and police accountability in the social media stratosphere. Torres approached cautiously, her body camera capturing every word. Your Honor, we sincerely apologize for this misunderstanding. It was not a misunderstanding, Officer Torres, Kesha interrupted. A misunderstanding is when you misunderstand directions. It was a profile. It was prejudice. It was a systematic assumption that a black woman could not legally own anything of value. Mitchell finally found his voice, though it was barely more than a whisper. Judge Washington, I was following protocol. Protocol? Kesha's eyebrows rose with the same expression she used when questioning questionable testimony. Does your protocol include assuming a carjacking was committed based on racial demographics? Your protocol includes refusing to allow someone to provide identification? Your protocol includes threatening to arrest you for exercising your constitutional rights. She pulled out her phone, showing 17 missed calls from Chief Justice Thompson. While you were conducting this investigation, I missed votes on landmark cases. An emergency judicial conference I was supposed to attend passed without a deciding vote on police accountability measures designed to prevent exactly this kind of encounter. The irony hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Mitchell's actions had a direct impact on legislation aimed at reforming police behavior. The officer who profiled the judge influenced judicial decisions about profiling. Ma'am, Your Honor, Reynolds struggled with the transition from suspect to authority figure. What can we do with what you can do? Kesha asked, pulling a small digital recorder from her jacket pocket. Understand that I am documenting this entire encounter for potential legal action. Mitchell's face went ashen. Were you recording? I have the right to do so under California Penal Code Section 148G, she said. Citizens are allowed to record encounters with police in public places. Judges, in particular, are responsible for documenting potential civil rights violations. The crowd pressed forward, sensing the tide was turning. Mrs. Hayes stepped forward boldly, reasserting her judicial authority. Officer Mitchell, I've been trying to tell you who she is. I've been on this court for 40 years and I know Judge Washington, you weren't listening. Madam, we value, Torres began. No, Mrs. Hayes interrupted. You value nothing. You saw a black woman and assumed criminality. In my 40 years on the bench, I've seen that same prejudice ruin careers, ruin lives, and undermine justice. Amara's on-air commentary evolved from shocked observation to real-time analysis. Folks, this is what systemic racism looks like. This is why we need police reform. This judge was arrested for driving her father's car while she was black. The audience peaked at 75,000. Major news networks began reaching out to Amara for permission to use her footage. The story was going national before Mitchell even realized what was happening. Kesha opened her briefcase completely, revealing additional documents that made Mitchell's stomach drop. Legal briefs on police misconduct cases, civil rights cases, constitutional interpretations. This wasn't just any judge. This was a judge who specialized in the very cases his actions had just created. Officer Mitchell, she said, her voice carrying the weight of judicial authority. In my 15 years on the bench, I've seen hundreds of cases involving police misconduct. I've studied racial profiling statistics closely. I've convicted officers for civil rights violations. She paused, letting the implications sink in. Your precinct, in particular, has a 23% higher stop rate for black drivers than the county average. Your personnel record includes 18 excessive force complaints and 2 federal lawsuits settled by the city. Mitchell's knees buckled. How did she know? How could she have access to these records? I know these statistics, Kesha continued, because I chair the Judicial Committee on Police Accountability. I review departmental data quarterly. I recommend policy changes. I approve settlements. The revelation hit like a thunderbolt. Mitchell wasn't just profiling a random judge. He was profiling the judge responsible for overseeing police reform in the county. The judge who would shape the future policies of his department. The judge who could impact his career, his retirement savings, his legacy. This meeting will be a textbook case, Kesha said matter-of-factly. It will be analyzed in police academies, law schools, and civil rights seminars. It will demonstrate the intersection of racial bias and abuse of power. Rodriguez, the mall's security manager, called his corporate headquarters. The parking lot incident had already gone viral, and management needed damage control strategies. The mall would face scrutiny over its security policies, its relationship with local police, its response to discrimination. There was a minute left. Kesha's phone rang again. Chief Justice Thompson was calling for the 19th time. The emergency conference couldn't wait any longer. Democracy demanded decisions, even when judges were being profiled in parking lots. "I need to take this call," Kesha announced. "The Chief Justice wants my vote on cases that will affect civil rights laws across the state." She answered the phone, her voice immediately becoming professional. "Chief Justice Thompson, this is Judge Washington. I apologize for my absence, but I was detained by the police while attempting to return to my chambers." The conversation was audible to those nearby. Thompson's voice carried concern, authority, and barely contained anger. Within minutes, the chief judge was communicating directly with the police commissioner. The chain of command that ran law enforcement mobilized. Mitchell's radio crackled. Unit 47 was returning to the station immediately to confer with Commissioner Hayes. Commissioner Hayes was the son of Mrs. Dorothy Hayes. The older woman who had tried to help now smiled with the satisfaction of 40 years in the judicial system. She had seen justice delayed, but rarely justice denied. "Officer Mitchell," Kesha said, ending the call, "you have a choice. You can learn from this meeting and be part of the solution, or you can continue the same patterns that have led us to this moment." She pulled her robe from her briefcase, the final symbol that changed the entire situation. The black fabric with red trim represented authority, fairness, and the rule of law that Mitchell had sworn to serve. "This robe," she said, holding it up for the cameras, "represents 15 years of service to the law. It represents every case I've heard, every decision I've made, every constitutional right I've defended." The crowd fell silent. Even the live commentary paused as viewers processed the symbolic power of the moment. "When you profiled me today, you weren't just profiling Kesha Washington. You were profiling the justice system itself. You were profiling the constitutional principles we are all sworn to uphold." Mitchell's career flashed before his eyes. 3 years until retirement, pension benefits, health insurance. Everything that had motivated his service now hung in the balance because of 30 minutes of prejudice. But Kesha wasn't done yet. There was one more revelation, the final piece of the puzzle that would complete the story and change everything. Carrying a quiet power that silenced courtrooms. "There's something else you need to know about this situation. Something that makes your actions even more significant than you realize." The crowd leaned forward, the cameras focused. The live audience held their breath. The final secret was about to be revealed. "Officer Mitchell," Kesha continued, her voice a blade cutting through the tension in the parking lot. "An emergency court conference that I missed today. We were voting on case number 2024 CR 8847, your federal civil rights lawsuit." Mitchell's face went white. The case he'd tried to forget, hoped would get lost in the legal bureaucracy, was sitting on Judge Washington's docket. The woman he'd just humiliated held his professional future in her hands. The victim, Angela Rodriguez, claims you profiled her during a traffic stop 18 months ago. Does that sound familiar? Kesha's voice carried the precision of 15 years of criminal law. Same shopping district, same assumptions, same pattern of behavior. The live feed exploded, surpassing 90,000 viewers. Amara's hands shook as she held the phone steady, knowing she was documenting legal history in real time. The comments section became a blur of outrage, support, and disbelief. Reynolds stepped forward, his 23 years demanding immediate damage control. "Your Honor, Officer Mitchell was following department protocol." "Protocol?" Kesha opened her briefcase again, pulling out a thick blue-bound document. California Penal Code section 135 prohibits law enforcement from discriminating on the basis of race, color, or national origin. Your protocol violates state law. She flipped through the pages with the efficiency of someone who has memorized constitutional law. Furthermore, under Title 42, United States Code, Section 1983, Officer Mitchell's actions constituted a federal civil rights violation. The financial liability alone could exceed $2.3 million based on recent settlement precedents in the Ninth Circuit. Torres activated her radio, requesting immediate superior presence. This had gone beyond a simple misunderstanding to a potential federal case with enormous financial implications for the department. "Your Honor," Reynolds said carefully, "what will it take to resolve this situation?" Kesha smiled, the same smile she used when lawyers asked poorly worded legal questions. "Sergeant Reynolds, you are asking a sitting judge to negotiate a violation of his own civil rights. That is not how justice works." The crowd pressed on. Mrs. Hayes stepped forward, her judicial authority fully restored. "Judge Washington, in my 40 years of legal practice, I have never seen such a blatant disregard for basic human dignity." "Mrs. Hayes is right," Kesha replied. "But this is not just about dignity. This is about a systemic failure that requires systemic solutions." She turned to address the cameras directly, knowing her words would reach millions beyond the crowd in the parking lot. Officer Mitchell represents a pattern of behavior that undermines public trust in law enforcement. According to Justice Department statistics, Black drivers are 31% more likely to be stopped and 44% more likely to be searched, despite being 26% less likely to be carrying contraband. Mitchell found his voice, though it sounded weakened by the weight of the evidence against him. "Judge Washington, I made an error in judgment." "An error?" Kesha's eyebrows rose with judicial skepticism. "Officer, you threatened to arrest me for exercising my constitutional rights. You inferred criminal activity based solely on racial demographics. You ignored the testimony of a witness from Mrs. Hayes. You refused to allow me to provide identification. These are not mistakes. These are constitutional violations." The mall's security manager, Rodriguez, came over with a corporate attorney on speakerphone. The mall faced potential liability for deploying discriminatory policing on its property. Insurance companies had already reached out. "Your Honor," the attorney's voice shook over the phone. "Northbrook Mall deeply regrets this incident and is willing to cooperate fully with any investigation." "Cooperation requires action, not apologies," Kesha said. "This mall's security policies allowed racial profiling on private property. Your liability extends beyond this incident to every discriminatory act your security personnel witnessed and failed to prevent." She produced another document, a civil rights liability opinion on the premises. Under California Civil Code Article 51, Section 71, businesses can be held liable for discriminatory acts committed on their premises if they fail to take corrective action. The corporate attorney fell silent. Malls across the state would need to review their security protocols, train their staff, and implement anti-discrimination policies to avoid such liability. Commissioner Hayes arrived with sirens wailing. The son of Mrs. Dorothy Hayes, he had 3 decades of law enforcement experience and a reputation for accountability. The first thing he saw was his mother standing vindicated in the crowd while his officers faced a scandal that could have ended their careers. "Judge Washington," Commissioner Hayes approached with the respect due to the judiciary, "please accept my apology for this inexcusable violation of your rights and dignity." "Commissioner, your apology is accepted, but accountability requires more than words," Kesha responded. Officer Mitchell's behavior demonstrates a systematic failure of training that compromises both the public trust and the accountability of the department. She opened her legal document to a specific page. "Your department's insurance company, Municipal Risk Management, has paid out $847,000 in racial profiling settlements over the past 3 years. Officer Mitchell is responsible for $312,000 of that liability." Commissioner Hayes' jaw tightened. Insurance costs were strangling police budgets across the state. Departments that failed to control civil rights violations were seeing their premiums skyrocket or their policies canceled. "What specific relief are you seeking, Your Honor?" Commissioner Hayes asked, understanding that court recommendations carried the force of legal precedent. Kesha closed her briefcase, her decision made. Officer Mitchell has 3 options, and these choices will determine not only his career, but the trajectory of police reform in this county. The parking lot fell silent. 96,000 viewers watched the live broadcast as a sitting judge issued a legal ultimatum to law enforcement. Option 1. Officer Mitchell faces immediate suspension pending a federal investigation under 1983-40 U.S. Code. He faces potential criminal charges, civil penalties, and permanent disqualification. This option protects his constitutional right to due process while acknowledging the seriousness of his actions. Mitchell's legs nearly buckled. Criminal prosecution meant jail time, loss of pension, and the destruction of his family's financial security. Option 2. Officer Mitchell accepts a voluntary demotion, undergoes 200 hours of bias training, and becomes a model for police academy reform. He testifies before the state legislature about the dangers of racial profiling and becomes an advocate for change. This option offers redemption through education and service. The crowd murmured. Second chances were rare in civil rights cases, but transformation through accountability offered hope for systemic change. Option 3. Officer Mitchell retires immediately with full benefits, recognizing that his mentality represents outdated policing practices that have no place in a modern law enforcement agency. He avoids prosecution but declines any future role in law enforcement or security. Commissioner Hayes understood the political implications. Option 3 protected the department from federal investigation while eliminating the problem officer. Option 2 provided educational value but risked public criticism. Option 1 guaranteed negative publicity but demonstrated accountability. Officer Mitchell, Kesha said. Her voice carried the authority that had settled thousands of legal cases. You have 60 seconds to choose. Your decision will be binding and effective immediately. The countdown began. Not a time for an emergency conference, as had been the case with the previous sense of urgency, but a final moment of choice that would define careers, policies, and precedents. Mitchell looked at his hands, still holding the handcuffs he had planned to place on the sitting judge, his 18 excessive force complaints, his federal lawsuits, his pattern of behavior that had led to this moment of reckoning. He began, his voice breaking. Reynolds put his hand on Mitchell's shoulder. Tom, think of your family. Think of your future. Torres activated her video camera, ensuring that every word was recorded for legal procedures and training purposes. The live viewers held their breath. The commentary slowed as 98,000 people waited for a decision that would affect police accountability across the country. Mrs. Hayes smiled with the satisfaction of 40 years in the justice system. Her son, the commissioner, maintained his professional composure, privately acknowledging his mother's rightness. Kesha waited with the patience of trial experience. 15 years of hearing confessions, apologies, and justifications had taught her to recognize the moment when a man was confronted with the truth about his actions. 30 seconds left, she announced. Mitchell's career, his pension, his family's future, all hung on a choice between responsibility and consequences. The mathematics that had underpinned his prejudices now demanded a different kind of calculation. The moment of decision had arrived. I'm choosing option 2, Mitchell said, his voice barely audible above the murmur of the crowd. I'll take the demotion, go through training, and testify about what I did wrong. The parking lot erupted in surprised discussion. 104,000 viewers of the live stream had witnessed a police officer choose responsibility over self-preservation. The comments poured onto Amara's screen faster than anyone could read them. He had indeed chosen responsibility. This was historic, real change, on live television. Judge Washington nodded with the measured approval she reserved for defendants who had pleaded guilty. Officer Mitchell, your choice demonstrates the possibility of growth through responsibility. However, this agreement requires immediate implementation and measurable results. Commissioner Hayes stepped forward, his authority as police chief now coupled with judicial oversight. Judge Washington, I will personally ensure Officer Mitchell complies with these terms. This incident will trigger a department-wide review of training protocols and accountability measures. Commissioner, your commitment is noted, Kesha responded, pulling the final document from her briefcase. It is a memorandum of understanding I drafted during our conversation. It outlines specific reforms your department will implement within 90 days. She handed copies to Commissioner Hayes, the media, and Amara for the live stream audience. The document detailed specific changes that would prevent future incidents. Mandatory use of video cameras for all traffic stops, with video reviewed by citizen review boards. The technology existed. Implementation required only administrative will and a budgetary allocation of $2,300,000 annually. Every stop would be recorded, every interaction documented, and every officer held accountable for their conduct. Quarterly bias training for all officers, conducted by community organizations and civil rights experts. The training would include real-life scenarios, cultural competency, and de-escalation techniques specifically designed to combat racial profiling. Costs $450,000 a quarter, but invaluable to the public's trust. Data transparency requirements mandating monthly public reporting of traffic stop demographics. Statistics would be analyzed by race, location, and officer to identify patterns of discriminatory behavior before they become civil rights violations. The public would have access to real numbers, real accountability. A community oversight board with subpoena power to investigate complaints of misconduct. Citizen oversight would include community members, legal experts, and advocates with the power to compel testimony and evidence. No more internal investigations protecting problem officers. These reforms, Kesha explained to the cameras, are evidence-based solutions to systemic problems. They are not punitive measures against law enforcement. They are professional standards that protect both the rights of the public and the careers of officers. Torres, who documented the entire meeting with her video camera, stepped forward. Your Honor, speaking as a younger officer, I support these changes. None of us went into law enforcement to violate anyone's rights. We need better training and clearer guidelines. Her statement resonated with the crowd and throughout the live stream. A police officer publicly supporting reform was demonstrating the possibility of change from within the system. Viewership topped 135,000 as news networks amplified the story. Mall manager Rodriguez approached with a corporate lawyer still on speakerphone. Judge Washington, Northbrook Mall, pledges to implement similar oversight measures for our safety protocols. We will establish bias reporting systems and mandatory training for all staff within 60 days. The private accountability surprised many observers. Business rarely voluntarily agreed to additional regulation, but the legal liability and public image risks made compliance preferable to resistance. Corporate America watched, learned, adapted. Mrs. Hayes stepped forward, her 40 years of judicial experience lending weight to her words. Judge Washington, I want to thank you for handling this situation with a dignity and wisdom that your father would have admired. Judge Robert Washington would have been proud. The mention of her father brought visible emotion to Kesha's measured manner. Mrs. Hayes, my father taught me that justice delayed is justice denied, but justice achieved through education is justice that lasts. This parking lot will be a classroom for change. Reynolds gathered up Mitchell's equipment, the badge, the radio, the service weapon, symbols of authority that were to be returned only after the agreed-upon terms were met. The demolition was immediate and clear, demonstrating the consequences of constitutional violations. Officer Mitchell, Kesha said, her judicial power now tempered with compassion. Your choice today begins a difficult journey. Bias training is not punishment. It is education about the unconscious biases we all carry. Your testimony before the legislature will help other officers avoid making similar mistakes. Mitchell nodded, realizing that the lowest point of his career could be his greatest contribution. Judge Washington, I am sorry. I was wrong about everything. About you, about the assumptions I made, about what policing should be. Apologies matter, but actions matter more, she replied. Your testimony will reach thousands of officers in training. Your story will be part of police academy curricula across the country. This is how individual accountability creates systemic change. The live stream reached 142,000 viewers as news networks began airing the resolution. Judge Washington took its place alongside police reform and justice matters across social media. The Black stories that emerged from this meeting will inspire moving stories of transformation. Commissioner Hayes addressed the cameras directly. This incident demonstrates both the problem and the solution. Officer Mitchell's actions were unacceptable, but his choice to accept accountability shows that change is possible. Our department will implement every reform Judge Washington has proposed. The crowd began to disperse, realizing they had witnessed something historic. Real stories like this have changed laws, changed education, changed hearts and minds across the country. This parking lot, Judge Washington said, looking back at the scene that had transformed from humiliation to education, will be remembered not for the bias that took place here, but for the reforms that emerged from the direct confrontation of that bias. The mathematical precision that led to Mitchell's bias has been replaced by another equation. Individual responsibility plus systemic reform equals sustainability. 6 months later, the aftermath of that Saturday afternoon continued to transform communities across the country. Officer Mitchell completed his 200-hour bias training program, becoming the first law enforcement officer in California history to voluntarily testify before the state legislature about his own misconduct. His emotional testimony about unconscious bias and the dangers of racial profiling helped pass Senate Bill 1619, the Police Accountability and Community Trust Act. "I saw a black woman with an expensive car and assumed criminality," Mitchell told lawmakers, his voice steady despite the weight of the admission. "I nearly ruined my career and violated the constitutional rights of a sitting judge because of biases I didn't even realize I had." The legislation mandated body cameras, bias training, and civilian oversight bodies across the state. 37 other states introduced similar bills, creating a national movement for police accountability that began in a mall parking lot. Judge Washington founded the Robert Washington Foundation for Judicial Excellence, providing mentorship and scholarships for young black attorneys entering the legal profession. The foundation's motto, inspired by her father's teachings, became a rallying cry for advocates for justice. Character over color, evidence over assumptions, accountability over power. Amara Johnson's live stream video became required viewing at police academies, law schools, and civil rights seminars across the country. Her documentation of the encounter earned her a journalism fellowship and a job as a civil rights reporter at a major news network. The real stories she covered continued to expose injustice and inspire change. Mrs. Dorothy Hayes, at 73, became chair of the county's first civilian police review board. Her 4 decades of trial experience proved invaluable in hearing misconduct cases and implementing accountability measures. "Age brings wisdom," she told reporters, "but action brings change." Northbrook Mall installed bias reporting kiosks, created community advisory groups, and established an annual $500,000 fund for civil rights education. Other retailers took similar steps, recognizing that corporate responsibility extends beyond profits to the public trust. The mathematical equation that led to bias, black woman plus expensive car equals theft, was replaced by a new formula taught in tolerance classes. Assumption plus bias equals constitutional violation. Evidence plus accountability equals justice. These moving stories of transformation proved that individual decisions can lead to systemic change. Black stories that emerged from direct confrontation with bias became powerful tools for education and reform. Commissioner Hayes retired 2 years later. His legacy was defined not by the officers who failed under his command, but by the reforms he implemented to prevent future failures. His mother's acquittal was his own redemption, proving that accountability could strengthen, not weaken, law enforcement. Judge Washington continued to preside over criminal cases with the added authority that came from personal experience with civil rights violations. Her decisions in police misconduct cases carried the weight of someone who had faced bias and chosen justice over vengeance. The 1967 Mustang still sits in her garage, immaculately maintained, a testament to her father's memory and her own resilience. She drives it to court every Saturday, remembering that dignity preserved through quiet perseverance creates more lasting change than anger expressed through loud confrontation. The lesson remains clear. When we witness injustice, we have a choice. We can remain silent and allow bias to flourish, or we can speak out and demand accountability that creates real change. Your voice matters in this fight for justice. Share your stories of overcoming bias in the comments below. Have you experienced discrimination? How did you respond? What change do you want to see in your community? Subscribe to Black Voices Speak for more stories of resilience, justice, and the quiet power that transforms systems from the inside. Click the notification bell because every story told brings us closer to a world where character truly matters more than color. Together, we can ensure that the next generation inherits a justice system that protects the constitutional rights of everyone, regardless of race, regardless of assumptions, regardless of the prejudices that once divided us. Justice achieved through education is justice that lasts.